Well, maybe not quite the glorified scrimmage that we expected against Villanova, but nonetheless, uh, Penn State took care of business, and I guess you can say they won their clunker. Welcome again, folks. I'm Tim Aiden, Black Shoe Diaries editor and writer. Joining me, my co-host Marty Leap, another fellow Black Shoe Diaries writer and editor, and our resident recruit Nick. So check out blackshoediaries.com for his recruiting coverage. Every Tuesday he has a nice little piece covering what Penn State's recruiting situation looks like. But anyway, Marty, I know we were hoping maybe this would have been a bit more comfortable of a win, and I just realized I needed to change the banner here. That says Ball State still.
I didn't even notice. Don't worry.
Technical difficulties, folks. But as I was saying, it wasn't quite the absolute beatdown that we were hoping it would be. Like I was hoping, best case scenario for me, I was thinking maybe they're up like 35-7 at the half. They're sticking Taquan Roberson and all the other second, third stringers in there by midway for the third quarter. That didn't quite happen. They did win handily ultimately, but it was uncomfortable at times and concerning, especially with the lack of push from the offensive line in the ground game. I certainly did not see Penn State struggling to run the ball more against Villanova than they did against Auburn or even at times against Wisconsin. What say you?
Yeah, that's definitely my big takeaway from this game is the continued struggles of the running game. They had their struggles against Wisconsin, but I mean, right now with 4 minutes go in the game, Notre Dame has -1 yards rushing against Wisconsin. That Wisconsin front seven is pretty nasty. They also struggled against Auburn, but again, Auburn's front seven pretty good. Those two in Iowa are probably gonna be the best front sevens Penn State plays this year. So you kind of chalk those up, but yeah, the not getting any kind of push, not getting any kind of movement up front today was definitely concerning. I'd love to see them maybe change things up a bit on the offensive line. Mike Miranda's really struggling at center. They're rotating Bryce Hefner at left guard anyway, and Hefner can snap, so can Eric Wilson, who's normal left guard. Maybe try one of them at center, or maybe you bump two Scruggs down to center with Wilson and Hefner as your guards. But as you get into the teeth of Big Ten play, this rushing attack's got to be better. There's just no way around it. It needs to be better. It's great to see the passing game doing so well, especially some of the concerns of it entering the season, but this running attack has to get better if Penn State is going to continue to look like a team that can win the Big Ten championship this season.
Absolutely. The thought that continues to now, obviously, I would say Penn State did a great job countering that lack of a run game against Wisconsin, especially, and even against Auburn with using those flares, those screen passes, getting or feeding screen passes to running backs out in space which acted as a way of like a run, excuse me. But like you said, if they're, if they want to, win the win the Big Ten East, win a Big Ten championship, even break into the playoff, they're going to need to get they're going to get some more consistency with that run game. Because some of the better teams in the schedule, they're gonna try and make Penn State one-dimensional and take away the ground game and try to really just try to clamp down on stopping the pass. Now that may be easier said than done given the weapons Penn State has in its passing game and the fact that Mike Yurcich is calling the shots, and he seems like a guy who knows how to work around a team's weaknesses. But it's definitely easy to see his team slipping up a couple times because maybe late in the game they need to go get just need to get 1 or 2 yards. Just got to pick up that first down, maybe run out the clock, or just need to keep the chains going. And it was concerning against Villanova. They couldn't do that, and there were several times, 3-4 times that they could not. At least 3 or 4 times, it seems like they started with excellent field position, right around midfield or even in Villanova territory. And I think at best they come away with a field goal from all those tries because all their other scores just came off of huge pass plays, which that was awesome to see. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it shows that this is an offense that can score from just about anywhere on the field at any given time. But you also should be a feeling that if we're starting at midfield or in the opponent's territory, we should be able to finish those drives in the end zone.
Yeah, totally agree. Another big issue today too with that is there was multiple times Penn State's in 3rd and 2, 3rd and 1, 4th and 2, and they couldn't. Not only did they not get it, there was just no push at all. I think the only 4th down they converted today, there was one to Brenton Strange on a pass play that called back because of a hold, but there was a 4th one where Noah Kane got it, and it was all second effort for Kane. They tried to go off tackle. There was a defensive end waiting for him. He kind of put a little spin move juke on the guy, fell forward. It was all on Kane's effort to get that first down. And that's what really concerns me too. Like you said, the big plays are great to see. One thing that James Franklin has always harped on is that to him, probably the two most important components of a football game to winning the game are winning the big plays and winning the turnover battle, which is something Penn State has done in all 4 games this year and is a big reason why they're 4-0. And that's something we saw them do with great success, in the Joe Moorhead years and even in 2019 with some of the deep shots to Hamler. But you can't ultimately those seasons where they really did live on the big plays and the turnovers, when they had to run the ball, they still were able to run the ball. Now it helped a lot that 2 of those 3 years you had Saquon Barkley, and in 2019 you had Journey Brown. But lack of talent is not the issue at running back for Penn State. Sure, they don't have an all-time great like Barkley. Sure, they don't have a guy like Brown who was looking like a first-round pick, and unfortunately his career is cut short. But you have 3 really good running backs in John Lovett, Noah Kane, and Kevon Lee, who are all going to play on Sundays. You have Devin Ford, who can be a nice change of pace guy. Like you said, those check down passes and things like that. I think Ford can really feast in a situation like that. There was actually a few times today where he was open on those. And I just honestly don't think Clifford saw him because Clifford was under so much pressure in the backfield. But they have the running back talent and even up front of the offensive line. And I think this is where it really gets frustrating for me is early on in Franklin's tenure when they struggled with the offensive line, there wasn't a whole lot of talent there. He was left a pretty empty cupboard at offensive line. It takes 3-4 years to develop these guys. So even as the recruiting started to pick up, it took time. But, your offensive tackles and Rasheed Walker and Caden Wallace, you have 2 guys who are top 100 recruits coming out of high school. And you have a guy in Walker who a lot of people talk about as a potential first-round pick this spring. The interior of that line, you have Juice Scruggs, who was another guy very highly rated coming out of high school, a guy Ohio State wanted badly. Eric Wilson, who has a pretty good pedigree at Harvard. So you should be able to run the ball. You should be able to get much more of a push than you are. And it just makes me wonder what the issue is. Is it maybe something philosophy-wise between Phil Troutwine and Mike Yurcich's offense that aren't meshing well? I wouldn't think so. But, again, that's where I would like to see them try something different. Said rather it's Effner at center, maybe Juice Scruggs at center with Effner at that guard, or Des Holmes at that guard, maybe Landon Tangwall, very highly touted true freshman. Just something to change things up and see if you can get anything going on that offensive line right now. Because, Indiana's never going to be easy. They're a tough team. They're always going to go down swinging. But you got to assume they'll probably win that game next week, hopefully. But when you get to that Iowa bye week, Illinois, Ohio State stretch with Iowa and Ohio State, you're going to have to run the football if you're going to win those games, especially going into Kinnick Stadium. So they've got to get something figured out.
Right. I guess I would think the staff, they see these guys every day in practice, and perhaps they have messed around with trying Eric Wilson or Juice Scruggs or Effner, at center, and maybe they're realizing that maybe it's not as effective as Mike Miranda, which I guess is kind of a scary thought. But they haven't done that, though. Maybe this is the week they start doing so. I'm sure, if us as fans, we're, as bloggers, if we're noticing these problems, surely they are too. And, they're going to, I'm sure they're going to, try some things this week, and I'm sure that's going to be one. I would not want to be in the film room with Phil Troutwine tomorrow or Monday, whenever they break down the game film, because definitely be pointing out a lot of problems for them. But that being said, I mean, of course, it is still September. There's still time for some improvement to be done. So the only thing I told myself too during the game when we were struggling to run, I told myself I wouldn't go full reactionary and be like, oh my God, sky is falling. We're going 8-4. Notre Dame just got a pick six, it looks like, on Wisconsin. More on the rest of the Big Ten in just a moment. But the but yeah, I'm not gonna overreact to this because this can happen. This happens to every team. And yes, it even happens to Alabama. I remember a couple years ago, they were tied at the half with the Citadel, one of those FCS sacrifice games at the SEC schedules for November. They were tied at the half with the Citadel. And now, okay, maybe that Bama team a couple of years ago wasn't like national title caliber, but still, you would not expect that to ever be the case. So I think it's just part of it's just, naturally when you're coming off the high of having taken down a quality opponent like Auburn in the whiteout, you're following up with a noon, like what felt like a glorified scrimmage kind of a blue white game type atmosphere today against Villanova. It's not out of the ordinary to maybe not look as sharp as you would against an Auburn or a Wisconsin or even a Ball State, a team that which I said is a really good MAC team, and you had to be prepared for them. So it's so it's there's definitely some concerns going forward with that interior run game, but overall, I think if they can get that shored up a little bit, a little bit, they get shored up a decent amount, and all else being the same, this is still very much a team that can challenge for a Big Ten championship. Now, I guess transitioning from the bad part to the good part, Sean Clifford, Parker Washington, Jahan Dotson. Heck, Keandre Lambert-Smith got his first collegiate touchdown in a dramatic fashion. Catching a pass on the sideline as Cliff was scrambling out of trouble, and then just out athleting the rest of Villanova's secondary to take it to the house for 6. But Cliff, you can see the stat line rolling on the bottom, but threw for 4 touchdowns, 401 yards, and one interception, which was 100% on his receiver. Keandre Lambert-Smith absolutely should have come down with it and should have had a big gain from it, if not a touchdown. Instead, it goes off his hands, and there happens to be a Nova player behind him who picks it off. But Cliff, overall, just tremendous game. It was the most number of yards thrown by a Penn State quarterback in a single game since Christian Hackenberg lit up UCF for 454 yards in Ireland in what ended up and what was, Marty, perhaps this was James Franklin's first ever game as Penn State head coach, and of course we all know Sam Ficken kicked the game-winning field goal in that one. So what say you? I know Cliff at times he kind of was maybe going for the deep ball too much, but he had overall, you look at it, he still had a pretty awesome performance overall.
Yeah, he has 2 interceptions this year, neither of which were his fault. Like you said, that one today, Keandre Lambert-Smith should have had that. And if he does catch it, there's a real chance he turns around, runs past the defense, it's a touchdown. And his interception last week against Auburn, he just got, if the pass protection holds up for half second longer, he has, again, Keandre Lambert-Smith wide open in the end zone. Instead of being an underthrow, it's picked off, it's touchdown. So both of his interceptions this year could very easily be touchdowns, and neither of them are his fault. It just, to me, that's the biggest takeaway as a whole from the first 4 games is Sean Clifford. Really, ever since about halftime of that Wisconsin game, he's looked like a totally different quarterback. I'm not even saying he looked like 2019 Sean Clifford, because he looks much better than 2019 Sean Clifford. He's poised in the pocket. The biggest thing to me is when protection fails him and he has to roll out. In the past, Clifford tucks the ball and runs. Instead, he's keeping his eye down the field, still making plays. His touchdown pass to Keandre Lambert-Smith was actually a fine example of that. They tried to run a bubble screen to the top half of the field. It was not there. He rolled to his right. And in past years, Sean Clifford definitely tucks that ball and runs. Instead, he keeps his eye down the field, sees Lambert-Smith, dumps it off to him, who then uses his athleticism to just run past the defense and score. I think Mike Yurcich has done wonders with Sean Clifford. And, coming into the season, had you told me this was the Sean Clifford Penn State was going to get, I would say that this team has a legitimate shot at winning the Big Ten, which is what we've seen. Again, yes, they need to clean things up on the offensive line, but, sticking with the positives, outside of this offensive line, I don't think there's really anything on this team other than maybe depth, which is a little bit different to me because there's not a whole lot you can do about that. There probably isn't anything on this team as a fan that really worries you. I mean, yes, defensive end and linebacker, like I said, are both thin. If you get an injury or two there, you could be in a lot of trouble, but that's something you can't control. What you can control is working to get your offensive line better. And if this offensive line can get it together and get some improvement and help this running game come along, just this Penn State team with this defense is going to be very difficult to beat this season.
Well, I guess speaking of the Penn State defense, I know we've been talking offense the whole time. I really got no complaints about the defense. I mean, they dominated an FCS opponent the way you would expect a top FBS defense to dominate an FCS opponent. When the starters were in, Villanova only got a field goal. They only really threatened once in the red zone. And you could argue that was aided by a really egregious roughing the passer penalty on 3rd and long, which moved the ball into the red zone. It was an incompletion and a 4th down originally, but they called a roughing the pass, which was, you look back at the replay, it's a pretty ticky-tack call, if you ask me. But otherwise, I mean, they never allowed Villanova to really establish much of a rhythm or come up with any, really limited the explosive plays for the Wildcats. So that was great to see. I know Villanova stats are going to be a little bit inflated because they did get a couple touchdowns in garbage time against the student managers. Shout out to Rajon Pringle, Villanova's receiver, went over 100 yards, had a couple touchdowns. Of course, again in garbage time, but it's something cool that he can point to his kids and grandkids someday. And talk about how he played in Beaver Stadium and scored a couple touchdowns. So, but overall, I mean, it was a game that you never felt like Penn State was in any danger of falling victim to, an upset. Which, speaking of which, looking around the Big Ten right now, Marty, you see, I think what first thing that sticks out to me is Minnesota going down to Bowling Green, a team that they were favored to beat by 31 points. So it just goes to show you, at least, Penn State took care of business. Even if it wasn't pretty at times, they took care of business. Minnesota, on the other hand, did not. And, frankly, it is quite stunning to see that. I know they're missing Mo Ibrahim, but it seemed like Trey Potts had given them a ground game, but Tanner Morgan just had a real rough afternoon. And if you notice, like, I think when I was talking to you, my eyes kind of lit up because I noticed Notre Dame get back-to-back pick sixes off of Graham Mertz to end up with a blowout win, 41-13 over Wisconsin in Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, really not a banner day for the Big Ten. Wisconsin getting just pummeled by Notre Dame. That Wisconsin offense is terrible, which is unfortunate for them because they have a tremendous front seven, as we said. Awful loss for Minnesota, just awful. I mean, not just that they lost to a MAC school, but Bowling Green, that's not exactly a top tier of the conference type of school there.
They're not Ball State.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah, they're not Ball State. They're not Toledo. And even the Penn State game, unfortunately is going to look like a bit of a black eye because people are just going to see the score. And like you said, not realize that Villanova got 2 touchdowns essentially in garbage time. That touchdown drive at the end for Villanova that went, I think, like 95 yards or whatever it was. First off, the first play of the drive, Tyler Elsdon just barely missed having a tackle for loss that would put Villanova at about the half-yard line, and they probably just go into a shell there and make sure they get a punt off on that drive. And secondly, on that drive, Penn State had, I believe, 5 true freshmen on the field, something like 3 or 4 redshirt freshmen. I actually think Tyler Elsdon, who was playing Mike linebacker that drive, may have been the only player on the field who was not either a true or redshirt freshman. And you can kind of see it because you saw him flying all over the field trying to cover up mistakes for others. So, and the thing is, like, I was texting them with a buddy of mine after the game, and like he and I said, I would rather see the second, third string guys or even in this case, these fourth string guys who need these reps for developmental purposes out there in garbage time, giving up points and making the score look less impressive than see my ones and twos out there. And yes, the score looks a little prettier, but A, takes away developmental opportunities from your younger kids. And two, you're just putting players at risk for injury. So I think that's a big factor here too. Whenever Penn State had their ones and twos out there, the defense was stifling again. Like you said, the only points they got off the starting defense was when that very ticky-tacky ref in the passer called negated an interception by Jair Brown, and it was only a field goal. Arnold Ebiketie, unblockable again today. I thought Jaquan Brisker played a great game. Very quietly, Daquan Hardy has played a pretty good slot corner this year. Villanova, I don't think even threw Joey Porter Jr. I think he's starting to get the respect to where teams won't throw to him, which is great because you don't have a slouch on their side of the field in Tyree Castro Fields. I thought the defensive line played well. Brandon Smith all over the field again. Just, I know I've said it a few times now, and I'm going to continue to say it. This might be the best defense Brent Pry has had since he's been in Penn State. Again, there's no glaring holes at any of the levels. You're worried about safety play coming into the season, but Jaquan Brisker and Jair Brown have just been an absolute tremendous combination back there. Tyler Rudolph has shown some good things. Keaton Ellis, for the first time all season, got extended playing time today and looked awesome. These defensive ends, another position to worry about. Arnold Ebiketie is well on his way to being a first-team all-conference guy. Jesse Luketa looks like a rejuvenated player, defensive end. Nick Tarburton is just quietly out there week in and week out, giving them good reps, playing really good in the running game, being sneaky good in the pass rush. Tarburton had a couple good plays today. Renova ran some RPO stuff to this side, some option stuff to this side. He shredded the play perfectly and blew it up. So, yeah, there no complaints from me whatsoever from the defense. Just, if anything, and the only reason I'm touching on this is something I will have my 4 takeaways article on Black Sheet Diaries this evening, is this is the second week in a row Penn State dropped what would be a very easy pick six. This week, the victim was Johnny Dixon. And thankfully, that has not burnt them yet. My fear is, what if we get to a game where that does potentially come back to bite them? So hopefully Penn State can get that turned around where moving forward the rest of the season, whenever a ball hits them in the hands for an easy pick six, the defender holds onto the ball and is able to take it to the end zone and get the Nittany Lions a defensive score.
I'm optimistic it'll happen one of these games, Marty, and perhaps in a game where we absolutely will need it too. So, I like how this defense just, this is definitely the most ball hawking secondary I've seen in a long time. Like, they really do try to go for the interception. And of course, sometimes, that is a bit of a high risk. Like, sometimes, if you miss it, maybe the receiver catches and he's got, plenty of real estate for a big game. But, it seems most of the time they've at least been able to bat the ball down. If not, we're not talking about bobbling the pick six, but if at least able to get a hand on it most of the time. So that's good to see. Let's see. So I'm looking at some of the comments here. Notre Dame 41, Wisconsin 13, LMFAO. Yes, the LMFAO indeed, I guess, if you're a Notre Dame fan. Not laughing so much, I guess, from our perspective, because that does make the win at Wisconsin look a little less, takes some of the shine off. I shouldn't say it's not impressive. Going to Madison and winning in week one when you've got a brand new offensive coordinator and your quarterback's been much maligned and you're not, that's the first game they have fans back. So it's still still they won it in one, but unfortunately, now they're 1-2 and they got hammered by Notre Dame. It's at least on the scoreboard. They, that does look less impressive. And speaking of which, I noticed some people on Twitter making references to the 1994 Indiana game, which I could kind of see that. The only difference, of course, now being we have a playoff, in place, and it's not everything is based off pollsters. But for those of you too young or just don't recall, 1994, Penn State's last undefeated season, they were up like 35-14 in the fourth quarter in Indiana. And Indiana, per usual, in Bloomington was being a little peskier than we thought maybe they would be. And at the time, I guess they were peskier than expected. But Penn State finally seemed to get control of the game fourth quarter. They're up 3 touchdowns, but then the final few minutes, Indiana gets a They get a couple touchdowns, including with no time remaining. They get a Hail Mary touchdown, and then just tack on a 2-point conversion. So the final score says 35-29. Now, those who watched the game knew that those were garbage time touchdowns, essentially. But anyone else, and of course, it's 1994, so of course, the internet was really in its infancy back then, and you didn't get every single game on TV. So unless you were actually, and it wasn't so easy to watch highlights. And I had to like wait for Sports Center to come on that night. So if you just saw you just saw the final score flash up on a ticker or in a newspaper. You saw Penn State number one, Penn State 35, Indiana 29, and you're thinking, wow, Indiana gave them all they could handle, and they barely eked it out, and that actually bumped them down to number two, and they stayed there the rest of the year. Nebraska ended up being voted number one national champions, even though I won't get into all that because that ruined my childhood. So, but speaking of Indiana, it's a nice little segue into a little mini preview of the Hoosiers for next week. This is a night game, 7:30 on ABC. I was quite shocked, to be frank. I thought this was a 3:30 on ABC treatment, but at least maybe before today's game, I'm thinking to myself, oh man, a revenge beating at night. This is, definitely they should give it a TV 14 rating at least, because of the gratuitous violence. But how are you feeling now, Mar? Are you feeling more confident, less, or about the same in giving a revenge beating to Indiana next weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I still feel confident in Penn State winning that game. I think the revenge factor is going to be big. They were not happy with how things unfolded last year in Bloomington. It's been pretty close to a full calendar year at this point. Michael Penix still has not scored on that 2-point conversion. It still has not happened. It never will happen. And I think part of it, too, is not just that they lost, but the way it caused the season to really kind of come unraveled on them. I think they're going to be a very motivated team next Saturday. It's going to be a night game. That place is going to be jacked up. I mean, Beaver Stadium always is. But for goodness sake, they've put 100,000 plus in there for both Villanova and Ball State. Not having fans in attendance last year has definitely caused the fan base to be a little extra rowdy this year. I will be there. It'll be the first time I've been at a game since the last time Indiana came to Beaver Stadium in November of 2019. So pretty excited for that. But I still think Penn State gets it done. Ultimately, they're a much better team than Indiana. Michael Penix tends to turn into Superman against Penn State for whatever reason, but he's still the same quarterback he's always been. If you can get in his face, you can hit him, you can rough him up, he'll probably struggle. And I think that, Penn State ultimately they have too much speed on the outside also. I think one thing with Penn State's offense that really helps with the struggles of the rushing attack is, and I think, again, this is what, even with the problems rushing attack, can make them a legitimate Big Ten and potential college football playoff contender. There are very few teams in the country who are going to have a secondary capable of taking away Jahan Dotson and Parker Washington and Keandre Lambert-Smith and making sure that the tight ends don't kill you in the seam, and then making sure that you're not just dumping it off to John Lovett or Devin Ford or Kevon Lee or Noah Kane out of the backfield for 6-7 yards a clip. There's, even with the offensive line struggles, you combine how well Sean Clifford is playing with the amount of weapons that are on this offense, and then you throw in the elite level Penn State's defense has played at thus far this season, and that's why they're going to be very difficult for anybody to beat. And I can't see them losing a game this season unless just something wild happens against a team that is not either equal to them in talent like a Michigan or potentially more talented like Ohio State. Because even that trip to Iowa, yes, on paper, Penn State probably has more talent than Iowa, but it's Kinnick Stadium. Crazy things happen. But it's just, I think that they have too much talent on offense, even if the offensive line struggles, and this defense is too good. They'll come out next week against Indiana. I'm sure it won't be easy because it never is with Indiana. Even in years when Penn State's been awesome and Indiana has stunk. Like you mentioned 94. It's tradition with Penn State. You got to struggle with Indiana. It's like a rite of passage. Yep. I remember 2016, the last time Penn State won the Big Ten. I think Indiana went like 6-6, and the final score of that game was literally like 52-42. Like Indiana just would not go away. That's just what happens when Penn State plays Indiana. So it won't be easy. Tom Allen's a tremendous coach. But yeah, I still feel confident Penn State gets it done next week against Indiana. and gets to 5-0 and sets up a potential top 5 showdown with Iowa the following weekend.
I'm feeling the same. And although I will say, I think the Indiana being pesky tends to apply more when they played in Bloomington as opposed to State College. 2019 notwithstanding, they've typically been more lopsided wins in Penn State's favor. Actually, if I pull it up real quick, Indiana Penn State series. I'm pulling up Winspedia here. Because I know generally they're not. It's not terribly competitive, at least not compared to Bloomington. But I know. Let's see. They put up 45 on them. Let's see here. All right, I got them up. So, okay, last time in State College 2 years ago was 34-27 Penn State. They needed a last. Remember they had like a 9-minute touchdown drive, included a 4th and goal QB sneak.
Yeah, they took over 27-20 with I think 12 minutes left, 11 and a half,
Right.
and drove down, almost put the entire clock down. They went for them 4th goal to 1. Cliff ran it in, and then Indiana hit a huge pass down the sideline and scored with 30 seconds left, and then Penn State had to recover an onside kick.
And before that, time before that, 2017, they waxed them 45-14. That was a game, I don't know if you remember. That's where Saquon Barkley returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown. I believe Nick Scott or someone scooped up a fumble punt return for a score. They were up 28-0 by the end of the first quarter. They just, obviously never looked back. 2015, which is State College, 29-7 win for Penn State, and I believe they were missing Saquon Barkley in that game to an injury, and that was back when they were still reeling roster-wise from the sanctions. They still handled the Hoosiers. 2012, 45-22. Let's see. 2009, a little more competitive, 31-20, but 2008, 34-7. So 2003, 52-7. So generally speaking, it's less competitive in State College. It's really a Bloomington thing. But that being said, I think I'm still thinking something like a 2-3 touchdown win next weekend. I mean, like I said, I think Indiana, they're well coached. They'll hang tough. But I just think Penn State, I think the offense, they're not, for all the struggles with run blocking and whatnot, and with the inability to find consistency with a running back, there's so many weapons when it comes to the passing attack, and the pass protection's been pretty solid overall. And Cliff, of course, I mean, difference between him as a decision maker is just night and day between this year and the last 2 years. So I think they're gonna be able to light up a scoreboard enough. That defense will hold the Hoosiers' offense in check enough. But the thing I remember is even last year, I mean, up until that Indiana's last drive of regulation, they were holding Penix in check. He hadn't really gotten into much of a rhythm that day. They were really aided more by turnovers, which gave Indiana a short field. And I think, as you and others in our Black Diary Slack channel have talked about, Indiana last year on that little magical run of theirs, they really benefited from takeaways. I mean, to their credit, but it wasn't at a rate that you could sustain though for multiple seasons. They're kind of regressing a bit to the mean, and I don't see Penn. I had to look it up, but I think they committed 3 turnovers in that game. And of course, they clanked a field goal off of upright right before halftime, which you could hear loud and clear from your TV because there were no fans there. It was like me punching a trash can. But it's I just feel like, and again, the whole revenge game. I just feel like, and the fact they moved it tonight. I mean, to me, that just sealed the deal in my mind. Penn State is gonna rock these guys next weekend. So I'm thinking something like a 14 to 20 point victory under the lights myself. And of course, the Iowa game that we will that's another. I guess we'll preview that maybe next week. But that's another thing where if Penn State can avoid turnovers, That's how Iowa thrives. That defense drives off turnovers. If and because their offense isn't exactly that explosive. If you can make them have to go down the field like 75, 80 yards to try to get in the end zone instead of giving them 30 or 40 yards. I they're certainly beatable. Now, of course, like I say, Kinnick Stadium Magic, which Penn State's been kind of immune to a bit. It seems they've won the last two night Kinnick games, but this is a late afternoon Kinnick kick now. It's been confirmed 4 o'clock on Fox. The Fox or FS1? I guess I didn't see which channel, but one of the Fox network channels, 4 o'clock. So we'll see. Maybe late. Last time they played late afternoon at Kinnick though was 2008. Yeah, we won't talk about that, but
Iowa got enough Kinnick magic in that game when they most likely cost Penn State a trip to the national championship game for a lifetime. We don't.
So there's some demons to exercise
that again
with the late afternoon Kinnick magic. So, but anyway, any final thoughts, Marty, on today or next week or Big Ten in general?
No, I think I agree with you for next week. I still think it'll be 35-17, 31-14, somewhere in that ballpark. Like you said, that game last year, in addition to that missed field goal right before the half, the drive prior to that, Penn State was down inside the 5-yard line, and Will Levis fumbled the ball, and Indiana recovered it.
I totally forgot about that.
Yep.
That walked out of my mind.
Yep, because the defense got a 3-and-out, and then they went down for the field goal and clanked it, and just it was so many things. On the final drive, where Indiana went down to score to tie it, Shakatone, it was either Shakatone or Jason Owais called for an absolute just phantom face mask penalty. Never came close to Penix's face. I think that was on like a 3rd and 20 where Penix just chucked it out of bounds to keep things alive. It was just one thing after another. And it's just, like you said, those kinds of performances aren't repeatable. And, one comparison I will make between Indiana last year and Iowa this year is I feel like both of them are teams who are thriving big time off the turnover, which credit to their defense for being in position for making plays. But that's tough to sustain. If you don't have an offense capable of driving the ball 60, 70 yards or an offense that isn't capable of getting big chunk plays, you're really going to struggle to consistently move the ball and win games, even with turnovers, because turnovers aren't going to continue. I mean, look at Penn State. I think they have 2 turnovers this year, the 2 Clifford interceptions, neither of which were his fault at all. I'm trying to think. I know Kevon Lee fumbled last week, but they recovered it. So I'm pretty certain those are the only 2 turnovers Penn State has this year, neither of which should have happened. But, they don't turn the ball over. And as long as Penn State continues to take care of the ball, like you said earlier, I think they'll be fine in both of these games and head into a bye week, a well-deserved bye week because this first 5 – I said coming into the season, we know going into the bye week what the season is going to be for Penn State because this first 5-game stretch is brutal. At Wisconsin, we've talked at length about how Ball State is a very good MAC team. The Auburn game last week, and then Indiana, who preseason top 25 team, and now going to Kinnick Stadium after that. Once we get to that bye week, we'll know a lot about the Nittany Lions and where they're going to go. Because quite honestly, had you told me come into the season they could be 4-1 going into that bye week, I would have taken that in a heartbeat. And right now, I would still take 4-1 going into that bye week because everything you want to accomplish is still ahead of you. You're still in position. If you go into that bye week at 4-1, you win the rest of your games. You're going to go to Indianapolis and play for a Big Ten title and probably a trip to the college football playoffs. So yeah, there's some things you can be nitpicky about here through these 5-1 going to the bye week. Excuse me, I apologize, but there's some nitpicky things you can be about coming out of this game. But ultimately, for me, it's tough. It was 31-3 when Penn State, or 38-3, when Penn State started to pull starters and call off the dogs. You need the offense line to be better, but in the Black Sheet Diary Slack channel today, Dylan pointed this out. If through 4 games, you're only complaining primarily about one part of your team, you have a good team because you can easily fix one struggling position group. You can't fix when you've got 3 or 4 position groups struggling right now. And even the offensive line, their pass protection hasn't been bad. It's primarily been the inability to run the ball in between the tackles because even the off-tackle stuff hasn't been terrible. If Penn State can start to run the ball in between the tackles with more consistency, it has to be great. Get 3.5 yards a clip. I will take that. You're going to be fine. So yeah, right now through 4 games, I would like to think that the morale of Penn State fans has to be high. I know with me it is. Especially I was the guy coming into the season, predicted probably either 9-3 or 8-4. At this point, I'd be shocked if either of those things happen. Yeah, I mean, at this point, I have a hard time seeing them not go at least 10-2, which with this being kind of a bridge year to some of the younger guys coming along, the recruiting class that's coming in, I will take that. And hey, right now, I think, like I said, you can't complain. They're 4-0, and they have looked as good as anybody in the Big Ten through 4 weeks.
Absolutely. But as you said, about this being a brutal first 6 weeks for Penn State. I mean that November slate now is suddenly starting to look like a potential gauntlet. And I'm watching Michigan right now. They're up 7-3 on Rutgers, and they just got a nice pass play. About to just got inside the 7. Looks like they're gonna maybe punch it in on Rutgers here. But Michigan. I think Clay was saying the Slack channel. He thinks Michigan could be undefeated when they come to Valley. Potentially, I haven't looked at Michigan's schedules, but I mean, I could certainly see it if they keep playing the way they've been playing. Maryland, they have probably outside of Ohio State. They probably and I mean their receivers are pretty solid too. I mean, I'm probably right up there with Ohio State, maybe Penn State's. They seem to have a quarterback in Talia Tagovailoa, so. Taylor Fleet Davis, decent runner. So they seem to have an offense. And defensively, I guess we'll find out how they are against. But they've been fine. But that's a game that's in College Park, and it's the week after they go to Columbus to face Ohio State. So, if we'll see if Penn State can get the win in Columbus, then perhaps they'll be. We're fired up. Now, granted, that may be also similar to Indiana. That's also a revenge game of sorts after the way Maryland just stomped all over Penn State last year in Beaver Stadium. But that's going to be. I could see that being a shootout type of game in College Park, and then following week you got Michigan coming to Happy Valley. Maybe it could be a second whiteout game, but that's certainly looking like it'll be a real dogfight. And then Rutgers. Game Penn State should win, but that's not a team you can sleepwalk through and beat by 2 or 3 touchdowns anymore. You actually got to, show up and bring it in order to do that. And then Michigan State, I mean, they look like one of the most improved teams in the Big Ten, and they got a solid run game of Kenneth Walker III. They've got a couple of solid receivers. It seems like Peyton Thorne is starting to rise as a quarterback. So. Mel Tucker's done a tremendous job in just his second year, really his first true off season, being able to work with the team. As you know, he came in February of 2020, right before the world changed, and didn't get a real off season to get to know his squad. But you can already start to see Tucker's fingerprints on this program now. They look like a modernized offense, like a more they look like a Michigan State team that's embraced, the modern way of playing college football instead of, being stuck in D'Antonio's old school 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of ways. So, but that's, end of the season, then, that's definitely going to be a tricky one too. So, like I said, that I think that November slate is going to tell a lot of this team as well, just like these first 4 weeks and coming couple weeks will tell as well.
Yeah, the Maryland game is definitely one to me. I think it's going to be intriguing because that offense looks really good. And I think the key point is there, like you point out, it's the week after Ohio State. Dating since James Franklin has been here in 2014, the Ohio State game, they will never say this. They will never, ever, ever say this. The Ohio State game is their Super Bowl. The reason is their Super Bowl, they know if they want to get to where they want to go, they got to beat the Buckeyes. Dating back to Franklin's first year, because they've played Ohio State as tough as anybody since James Franklin's been here. Following week, they are 3-4 overall and 1-6 against the spread. The only year they ever covered the spread was 2016 when they played Purdue with an interim coach who was actually former Penn State wide receiver coach Jared Parker, and they just pummeled that team. I think that Purdue team went 2-10.
And they won that game against Ohio State as well. So
Yeah.
They weren't
So
quite as hungover
a
as
little
maybe they
bit,
would
not
have.
as much of the hangover. And the thing is, too, I think part of it is you look at the losses. 2014's double overtime loss in the whiteout. 2017, 2018 games where Penn State blew big fourth quarter leads. 2019 was a game where with like 8 minutes to go, Penn State was driving down the field to take the lead and they threw an interception. They've all been close, hard fought, emotional losses because that's what you get when you get two good teams. And then last year, the loss to Ohio State made them 0-2. You knew the season was over, and they looked like they could not possibly care less when they played Maryland. But I think that's one thing to watch because, like I said, under Franklin, following the Ohio State game, they're 3-4 overall. They're 1-6 against the spread. Not saying they will lose to the Terrapins in that game, but that game being in College Park, whatever the spread is, it'll be. I would definitely be very intrigued in taking the Terps and the points, even if I think Penn State will still win it.
Certainly, and of course, we will definitely be doing deeper dives into all these games as the time gets closer. But we're gonna go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Marty, you'll have your 4 takeaways up on Black Shoe Diaries later today, this evening, I guess. And um, look. My position grades post will be up tomorrow sometime. They typically go up every Sunday. Clay Sartig, who's been on this before, did a tremendous job filling in for me last week while I was out of town. So, but yes, blackstars.com, your source in SB Nation for all things Penn State football and Penn State sports related. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We will see you next Saturday night, hopefully after the end of a revenge beating against Indiana. Marty, good seeing you, bud.
Good to see you, buddy. Take it easy, everybody. Thank you for tuning in.